All right. Welcome again to the grand final. To start off the round, debating on the motion, this House as India would permanently terminate the Indus Water Treaty, calling on the Prime Minister to start off this debate. Here.
Can you hear me?
Yep, audible and visible.
Uh, I'll take my POS verbally and three, two, one. Greetings to the House at large. I am the Prime Minister and I strongly agree with the motion. This House, as India, would permanently terminate the Indus Waters Treaty. Before I would start, I would like to give the definition for some keywords. First word, permanently terminate, means India will leave the agreement and will not have to follow its rules anymore. Second meaning, the Indus Waters Treaty is a 1960 deal when India and Pakistan share river water and Pakistan gets most of it. We support ending this treaty. My first point is about national security. This treaty was based on trust, but that trust is gone. India still faces attacks from across the border, yet we must keep giving water. This is not fair. Water is also power. By continuing the treaty, India gives up an advantage or harms it. Treaty helps India protect itself and send a clear message. My second point is that it is highly unfair to India. India is where the river starts, but India only gets about 20% of the water, while Pakistan gets about 80%. This stops from India building dams, storing water, helping farmers, and making electricity. Places like Jammu and Kashmir and Ladakh cannot grow fully because of this. This is clearly unfair and limits India's development. My third point, this treaty is more than 60 years old. Today, India has more people and needs more water. Climate change is also affecting rivers and rainfall, and India needs freedom to manage its water and better plan for the future. My fourth point is if we ending this treaty does not mean war. It just means India gets control over its own part of the river and can make its own decisions. It also puts peaceful pressure on Pakistan to act responsibly. Now, the opposition may argue that if India leaves the Indus Waters Treaty, it sets a bad example and weakens all international arguments. This is misleading. Not all treaties are the same. Countries change or leave agreements when they become unfair or outdated. That is normal in international relations. What actually harms trust is forcing a country to stay in a deal that is no longer updated. In conclusion, India should not follow an agreement that is unfair and safe and outdated. A strong country protects its people and its resources and plans for the future. That is why we stand for this motion.
All right. We thank the speaker for that speech. Calling on Leader of Opposition. Here.
Hi, am I visible and audible?
Yes to both.
Okay, I will be starting on the reverse countdown of three, two, one. Firstly, starting with a bit of characterization, the treaty is not merely a water treaty that we're talking about. It is one of the last functioning institutional threads between two nuclear armed states, which becomes very important in the context of this debate, right? The treaty has withstood major pressures over its 65-year history, including wars, a secessionist movement in Kashmir, recurring military skirmishes, and nuclear tests by both countries, right? The permanent termination removes any framework for managed de-escalation between both countries. Firstly, Pakistan foreign minister has hinted at a war on multiple occasions with India, with one official warning that Pakistan would secure all six rivers if water was not shared fairly. And Pakistan's army chief reportedly warned that India's future dams would be destroyed with missiles, right? So the proposition opposition does not need to endorse Pakistan's rhetoric, but we simply ask, is permanently eliminating the treaty worth triggering a conflict of spiral between two nuclear neighbors? This brings me to my first argument, which is the fact that termination gives India zero physical water and it's just a paper, or like it's just a piece of paper, it becomes a piece of paper, right? Firstly, proposition has framed India as reclaiming sovereignty over the western rivers, but sovereignty over water on paper means absolutely nothing if India cannot physically use use that water, right? Terminating the treaty does not redirect a single drop of water within India. The geography remains the geography, right? Now, the Indus River system flows through some of the most difficult terrain on earth. To actually store, divert, or use the western river's water, India would need to rebuild massive dams, reservoirs, canals, and irrigation networks in Jammu and Kashmir, a region that is extremely geographically unstable, logistically difficult, and already a conflict-prone zone, right? This could take a really long period of time, which is something India as a developing country cannot afford. Hence, it's in the best interest in the long term for India to keep this treaty at large with Pakistan, right? Now, what if we take them at their best case scenario? What does India actually gain on day one of the termination? Absolutely nothing, because the water still flows in Pakistan. Pakistan still irrigates its fields. Meanwhile, India has burned its legal standing, lost its treaty protections, and triggered a global diplomatic crisis, all for zero material benefit. They haven't gained any water, and we've actually lost credibility as a country, which I'll get to in my next argument. Now, currently, the idea of suspension is leverage that termination throw completely takes out of the picture, right? India has already suspended the treaty following the conflict that occurred with Pakistan. Now, the proposition asks us to make this entire thing permanent, but fundamentally they misunderstand how coercive diplomacy works. Suspension is a pressure tool precisely because it is reversible, while termination eliminates the incentive for Pakistan to comply with anything, because once it's terminated, it's less likely to be brought back, which suspension gives India as a tool or a benefit, right? Coercive diplomacy only works through the threat of continued or escalated consequences, conditional on behavior change. When India suspends the treaty, the implicit message is change your behavior and we will restore it, right? Pakistan's military and civilian establishment, particularly those with agriculture and economic interests, face internal pressure to act because the restoration is on the table. However, the moment India permanently terminates it, that conditionality disappears and Pakistan has nothing left to lose on the waterfront, and hence it's less likely to work as a diplomatic tool as a whole, right? And the impact of this is simple. This is a fundamental strategic blunder. India has essentially told Pakistan, no matter what you do, the treaty is gone. So then Pakistan's rational response is now to escalate because cooperation is no longer or does not offer any reward anymore. Now, this brings me to our third argument, which is essentially India's economic rise depends on being a rules-based actor, right? Because this is an actor motion, we can tell you that India in 2026 is not a post-colonial state. We are one of the fifth largest economies in the world and have a lot of diplomatic positioning when it comes to countries outside of Pakistan, right? Now, for this to actually matter and for this to have any standing, it fundamentally, by terminating the treaty, it fundamentally undermines the brand that India has tried to restore and show globally that our entire economic strategy depends on, right? Firstly, the global capital, particularly from all the huge countries like US, EU, Japan, and the Gulf, flows to India because India is perceived as stable, rules-following democracy with predictable legal frameworks. However, if we go ahead and terminate a treaty that is supposed to be fundamental to India's rules and order, then we show the rest of the world and we set the wrong precedent that we are not a rules-based system, we are not a rules-based democracy, and can switch up at any given point in time. This hurts us on a global scale, protected time. This hurts us on a global scale because it sets the wrong precedent for India as a democratic country, and the long-term implications of this can be huge, which is what my next speaker will elaborate on. So proud to oppose.
We thank the speaker for that speech, calling on the Deputy Prime Minister. Here.
Am I clearly visible and audible?
Yes, to both.
Okay. So, 1 second. I would like to just start with the backward. I prefer my POIs to be verbal, and I would just like to start with the backward count of 3, 2, 1. Good morning to the House at large. As the Deputy Prime Minister, I will do 3 things. First, I will respond to the opposition. Second, I will explain why this treaty no longer works today. And third, I will show why ending it makes India stronger. And before that, I will be asking a pre-buttal. So, dear Honorable Judge, before the opposition even tries to state this point, I would like to say why it is wrong. They will say this treaty keeps peace. They will this will increase tensions. This will harm people. But we, the proposition, say peace without fairness is not real peace. Avoiding change out of fear is not stability. And protecting an outdated agreement while your own people suffer is not justice at all. Now, first, I would like to correct some points that the opposition has stated. Their argument confuses creating water with controlling water. We are not claiming termination. We are not claiming termination creates new water. We are saying it removes restrictions on storage, such as dams, and usage, such as irrigation, power, and timing of the flow. And this directly affects how much water India can actually benefit from. So, yes, it's paper, but the paper decides who gets how much water, and that is real power. And the second, I would like to say that they say suspension gives leverage, but termination removes it. But that's backwards. Temporary suspension is weak leverage because it's uncertain, and Pakistan can simply wait it out, knowing that India will come back to the same rule. That creates no pressure. Now, moving on to my main argument. Firstly, this treaty is outdated. The Indus Water Treaty was, as said in the context, it was created in 1960. At that time, population was obviously smaller. Right now, the population has grown so much, and water demand was also lower because of the population. But right now, we have such a big and vast population in India that the water demand is too much. Today, India has a much larger population and a much greater need for water. But India is still forced to follow the old rules. This is unfair. No country should be stuck in a system that limits its own growth of the country and basic needs. Would you follow a rule if it is not helping your country at all to grow? Third, importance of leverage. Right now, India keeps sharing water without any conditions. This gives Pakistan no strong reason to change its behavior. If India ends the treaty, it gains leverage power in negotiation. The power helps India to push for fair agreements, fair role. I repeat, fair agreements and fair role. Without leverage, negotiations are weak. Now, let me talk about the geographical advantage. India is the country where these rivers begin. That naturally gives India the control because they are inside India. So, if they start from India, that naturally gives India control. But right now, India is not using that advantage. Instead, it is limiting itself with the old rules that were set a long time ago. This is strategically weak. No country should ignore its own advantage that they're getting, especially when its own needs are growing and they need it. Fifth, the opposition will say that this will increase tensions and harm ordinary people. But ending the treaty does not mean stopping water suddenly. It only means India is free to decide what is fair and what is not. Also, we must ask, what about the people in India who already face water problems? So many people. Why should they always suffer just to keep an outdated agreement alive? A fair system must protect its own people too. The debate is simple. Do we stay stuck in the past with the old rules, or do we take control of what is ours and take advantage and control our future? We choose things such as fairness, control, strength, advantages. And for these reasons, we stand proud in the government.
We thank the speaker for that speech, calling on the deputy leader of opposition. Here.
Yeah, just give me 20 seconds. Yeah, am I clearly audible and visible?
Yes to both.
Yeah, so you can just my pronouns are she, her. You can ask me POIs verbally. I'll be beginning my speech in the 1 minute. In the reverse countdown of 3, 2, 1. Panel, India has every right to be furious about after Pahalgam, but fury, as we've spoken about, is not a foreign policy, and a nuclear enable with nothing left to lose is not a victory, which is why we're so proud to oppose. Now, firstly, I'll be making a few rebuttals to the points made by side proposition. Now, firstly, side proposition has completely misunderstood one of our points, and they said that they're not claiming that termination creates new water, and neither are we, because that's physically impossible. What we are saying is that even if this treaty is terminated, India will not be gaining any new sources for water because of all of the reasons which my first speaker has spoken about. Because as we spoke about, as we've spoken about, the Indus River flows through some very difficult terrain. But it's particularly located in Jammu and Kashmir, which is a region which is very geologically unstable, logistically difficult, and very conflict prone already. So just to build all of the technology and infrastructure required to get water for the Indian population to use, that'll take hundreds of billions of dollars, 20 to 30 years minimum, and just in general would be very challenging to do. And we simply do not believe that it would help the country gain any more water to provide the population in any way, shape, or form. Which leads me to the next point, because side proposition has come up here and told us about how outdated this agreement is, and they start telling us about how India's population is rapidly increasing, which is why our water demand is rapidly increasing. But as we are telling you very clearly, even if India's population is increasing, even if India's water demand is increasing, by terminating this agreement, we're not going to be able to gain any extra water sources or resources for the population to be using. All we will be gaining is a more radical, a more violent neighbor, which is just going to harm the population in the long run, panel. Because we need you to understand that through this, through terminating this treaty, we will not be improving the amount of water we have in India. Now, we would also like to speak about the side proposition made a statement about how India is the country where the river begins. So we will be so they should obviously get control of it. And we simply do not agree with that logic at all, because by that logic, China technically owns the Brahmaputra River, and India spent decades arguing the exact opposite in various international forums. So we simply do not believe that you can claim that upstream means ownership, because when it suits you against Pakistan, and then completely differ and oppose that while arguing with China, because that proposition's principles destroys in one of India's most important water negotiation treaties with China. And now also proposition comes up here and speaks about how not all treaties are the same, and so international relations won't weaken, which leads me to our third argument, which I'll now be extending upon what my first speaker spoke about. Now we like to speak about how, like we spoke about already, India in 2026 is not India in the 1960s, with the world's fifth largest economy, with a G20 president, and a country actively positioning itself as an alternative to various of the superpowers, and as a leader in various fields and such. So we believe that when India, which is a developing nation, is going to start randomly just terminate such agreements, it's gonna create a rather bad image of India, where it's going to make us it'll be difficult for just general public and many people to distinguish between India punishing Pakistan's military from India weaponizing civilian water supplies, which is what it would look like. And we just believe that beyond this treaty, every bilateral investment treaty which India would sign, every trade agreement, just everything, all of these rest on the foundation that India honors its international legal commitments which it has made. So the moment this foundation cracks, the risk the risk on Indian investments and just India's name and India's prestige will just will probably crack as well. And we believe that this will just have a significant impact on India's international relations as a whole, which we believe is very vital. And we'd also like to point out that which in general we believe is very vital. So if we do a stakeholder analysis of all the parties within India itself, because as we know, India is the most important stakeholder for this act of motion, we believe that one, India will in general, if you compare propositions world to our side of the house, it's protected time. If you compare propositions world to our side of the house, proposition will simply just be making relations worse with its neighbors, with Pakistan and with other international countries as well, by simply terminating the one like the one agreement it had to not only maintain like stability and to maintain some amount of order, but also to use as a bargaining chip with Pakistan. Because if you terminate the like as my first speaker spoke about, if you terminate this agreement, you will have nothing to use as a bargaining chip to actually barter with Pakistan for other gains, which we believe is very, very important. And then we also believe that like when you get a cornered, water stressed nuclear armed Pakistan, it's just going to be much more dangerous, putting like as of course putting a much like bigger burden on the Indian military and in the Indian government at large, which we believe can simply just be avoidable. And we believe at large, the India as a large will not be gaining any extra water, we will not be gaining any resources. But what we will be gaining is a like is an enemy with nuclear resources who we cannot bargain with any further, because we've terminated one of the most important agreements which we used to use in the past to like have any form of relationship with Pakistan, which we believe is a world we do not want to exist in or promote, hence very, very proud to oppose. Thank you.
We thank the speaker for that speech. Calling on the member of government. Here.
Can I please just have 30 seconds?
Yep, go ahead.
I hope I am audible and everybody's able to see me.
Yep, audible and visible.
Great. So hi, I'm Sia Dikshit. My pronouns are she, her, and yeah. So if you have a POI, my preference is please unmute yourself and say POI, because if you message in the chat box, I will not be able to hear you. Great. So I would like to start my debate in the reverse countdown of 3, 2, 1. At its core, panel, this motion is about whether India remains bound by outdated constraints or reclaims full control over its own strategic future. Because Pakistan gets more water and still ends up exporting our blood. Good evening to the House at last. My name is Sia Dikshit, and as member of opposition, a few things in my speech today. Firstly, rebuttal. Secondly, a model. Thirdly, two arguments. And fourthly, stakeholder analysis. And lastly, impacts. Starting off with some rebuttal. Firstly, their argument is that water is still flowing to Pakistan, so nothing changes even if we terminate the agreement, because Pakistan will still continue doing irrigation, etc. And that completely misses the point, panel, because right now Pakistan does not just receive water, it receives guaranteed protected access under international obligation. That means India cannot meaningfully alter, store, or regulate the water even if its own need increase. Terminating that treaty fundamentally changes this, panel, because even if water continues to flow, because we agree the water cannot suddenly just shift from Pakistan back to India, Pakistan no longer will have any certainty over volume, timing, or future access, because India gains the ability to build control, release, and prioritize its own usage when necessary if we fundamentally terminate this treaty. That uncertainty is the entire point. Pakistan goes from a position of assured access regardless of behavior to one where access is conditional and strategically influenced. No, thank you. And that has two impacts. Firstly, it allows India to plan for its own long-term water security instead of being locked into fixed allocation. And secondly, it creates real deterrence, because Pakistan now has something material at stake. So, secondly, that point actually prove us if Pakistani leaders are already talking about taking controls beyond the treaty, it shows the agreement is not stable or respected in the long term. Why should India stay bound by strict regulations when the other side is willing to move beyond them? That leaves India constrained while the other side is opportunistic. That is exactly why we should terminate panel. If the other side is already thinking about beyond the treaty, India cannot afford to remain trapped within it. And lastly, it seems as the opposition has just been riding on the fact that India and Pakistan are both countries with nuclear weapons. Yes, they are. And please stop barging. Yes, they are two countries with nuclear weapons. That does not mean we will use them. You have to understand the fact that there are so many other international institutions which will stop us from doing that. And the fact that this is not as grave as and this is not something where nuclear weapons is required. Right, now moving on to our model. In our model panel, India formally withdraws from the Indus Water Treaty, ending its legal obligation to follow the fixed water framework. That does not mean immediate or total stoppage of water, but rather shift in control. Firstly, India gains the right to build dams, reservoirs, and storage infrastructure, regulate timing and flow of the water, and reallocate usage in response to climate and demand pressures. Secondly, India uses this control as a strategic tool. Water flow is no longer guaranteed. Future access becomes conditional and negotiable, and India can supply depending on broader diplomatic and security considerations. Thirdly, this is implemented as a gradual structural shift, not as a sudden
shop. Existing flows may continue initially. Infrastructure and capacity are developed over time, and changes are introduced in controlled planned manners. We're not advocating reckless or humanitarian harm. India acts in a way that is strategically calibrated, not arbitrary punishment. Now, panel, moving on to our first argument on structural water sovereignty and future security. The treaty locks India into outdated constraints over a critical resource, terminating its restores full sovereign control over water in a future defined by scarcity. The Indus Waters Treaty was designed in 1960 panel under completely different conditions. Lower population, less industrial demand, no climate crisis. Today, India faces rising water stress, unpredictable monsoons, and increasing agricultural and urban demand. Yet the treaty still stays. This creates structural vulnerability, and India is dependent on outdated rules for resource critical to survive. Ending the treaty allows India to build storage and dam infrastructure freely, as I have mentioned before. And the impact is that long-term water security will be there for millions in our country. Our second argument then is on credible deterrence through structural shift. Ending the treaty creates real long-term deterrence by introducing meaningful consequences for hostile behavior. Right now, Pakistan receives water access regardless of its action, and India continues compliance even during conflict. Pakistan faces no material cost for hostility. By terminating the treaty, India's willingness to escalate beyond symbolic measures introduces uncertainty and risk into Pakistan's calculations and changes the strategic baseline permanently, meaning they will think before they act. And this is not just pressure, it's a credible shift in bargaining power and a move from a symbolic deterrence. This is unique because then moving on to the stakeholder analysis. The key stakeholder in this debate is obviously India, for whom this policy ensures long-term water security in a future of increasing scarcity. It allows India to control and allocate its resources based on need, not outdated constraints. For the Indian state, this creates a shift from restricted compliance to credible deterrence, including introducing a real consequence for hostile actions and strengthening strategic leverage. From Pakistan, it removes guaranteed access and introduces uncertainty, which is a huge point in this debate panel, forcing a rethink of cost-free aggression. Now for some exclusive impacts. Only our side gives India full control over its water resources, allowing long-term planning in the face of climate uncertainty. Only we unlock the ability, this is protected time, to build large-scale storage and infrastructure without treaty restrictions. Only our world creates real material deterrence where hostile actions carry tangible consequences, and only we shift India from a constrained actor to a strategically independent one. And our side introduces uncertainty into Pakistan's calculations, breaking the current system of cost-free aggression. And it is for all these reasons we are.
We thank the speaker for that speech, calling on the member of opposition. You're here.
Can I get 15 seconds, please?
Yep, go ahead.
Am I audible and visible?
You froze.
Clear.
Is it just me, or could you try speaking again?
Hi, hello, can you hear me?
Yep, you're audible.
Sure. I'll begin in the my pronouns are she and her. I prefer verbal POIs. I'll begin in the self count of 3, 2, 1. As India, government must prove permanent, irreversible termination produces better strategic outcomes for India than every available alternative. Not that Pakistan deserves punishment. We agree that this specific irreversible decision serves India's long-term security better than retaining leverage. Our burden shows that India destroys two things it cannot rebuild. Now, firstly, opening opposition proved that India gains zero physical water. DLO proved India destroys its standing in every future agreement. I address only what government left standing. The PM told us trust is gone. This treaty was never built on trust. World Bank brokered three-tier dispute resolution designed precisely for a relationship without trust. That is why it survived 1965, 1971 and Kargil unbroken. Trust failing is India's reason to use the mechanism, not destroy it. Then the PM also told us that termination does not mean war. Pakistan's NSC, April 24th on 2025 verbatim declared water diversion would be treated as an act of war, met with full force across the complete spectrum of national power. So within weeks of mere suspension, both countries exchanged missile and drone strikes for 4 consecutive days. Governments asked India to make that suspension permanent. That is not diplomacy, that is choosing escalation and call it strategy. The DPM DBM also told us that termination creates leverage. Leverage requires something that the other party wants restored. Terminate permanently, Pakistan has nothing to negotiate toward. The DBM made the strongest case for suspension, not termination. Now, the MG told us India gains water sovereignty through gradual infrastructure development. MG's own model requires India to build dams and reservoirs before any operational control materializes. A decade of construction at minimum. As India, we absorb the full strategic cost today.
POI.
Benefit does not arrive until 2025. This is not sovereignty. That is a decade of exposure for hypothetical future gain. The MG told us that conditional water flow creates deterrence. Panel, that is exactly what suspension already achieves. The moment India terminates permanently, conditionality disappears. There is nothing left to condition. MG described the instrument we are defending and called it their argument. Now, moving on to my first argument. Termination does not weaken Pakistan's military. It destroys the structural condition that forces the military to calculate the cost of attacking us without India deploying a single soldier. The premise is as following. Pakistan's military is not moderated by goodwill. It is moderated by its civilians population bearing the consequences of its decisions. Our treaty leverage makes that happen. Mechanism A. When India suspends Pakistan's civilian economy faces direct immediate pressure. That pressure creates domestic political weight on Pakistan's establishment to calibrate its behavior. India inserts our strategic interests directly into Pakistan's internal politics without firing a shot. Termination permanently ends that insertion point. As India, we surrender the only lever we hold inside Pakistan's political architecture, voluntarily and irreversibly. B, a civilian population that loses its livelihood does not become politically inert, it becomes recruitable. Militant networks offer income and structure to people who have lost both. Termination fills that recruitment pipeline immediately in the exact geography that has produced every group that has attacked India. As India, we do not prevent the next Pahalgam, we remove every structural condition that prevented it from being worse. Now, the impact is that the government's world does not produce fewer attackers, it produces a military facing zero domestic accountability and a growing population with nothing to lose. India discards that one tool that created that accountability permanently by its own hands. Moving to my second argument, termination transforms Pakistan from a state of India's entire strategic toolkit is built to engage into a dispersed network none of those tools can reach. So basically, every instrument India possesses, strikes, sanctions, isolation, treaty leverage, is designed to engage a state. States calculate cost, states have pressure points. The moment Pakistan ceases to function as a coherent state, India's strategic arsenal becomes obsolete overnight. A. Pakistan's military currently calibrates because it has something to lose. Civilian legitimacy, economic function, institutional standing. Remove those and an adversary that once responded to pressure becomes one that does not. You cannot deter an actor without nothing left to use. Please stop badgering. Deterrence requires the threat of further loss and termination eliminates the last of it. B. Surgical strikes require fixed assets and command chains. Diplomatic isolation requires an adversary with standing to lose. Economic pressure requires identical pressure points. Every option India reaches for requires a coherent adversary. Termination dissolves that very adversary. As India, we have spent 60 years building a retaliatory architecture and we are being asked today to make it permanently irrelevant. As India, we go from a position where every attack produces a retaliatory option to one where every attack leaves two choices: escalate into a nuclear vacuum or absorb it in silence. India arrives there permanently by its own decision. And hence, opening opposition showed India gains no water. DLO showed India loses credibility in every future argument. We go deeper. As India, we disregard the only check we hold on Pakistan's military, fill the recruitment pipelines that produces our attackers, and make every retaliatory instrument we possess obsolete simultaneously. Government offers one movement of punitive action. We show India what it inherits the morning after. Thank you.
We thank the speaker for that speech, calling on the Gov Whip. Here.
Yeah. I hope that I'm clearly visible and audible.
Yes to both.
My pronouns are she and her, and I'll only be accepting verbal POIs. And with that, I'll start my speech in a reverse countdown of 3, 2, 1. Panel, at its core, this debate asks that should India continue to be constrained by a 1960s agreement, or should it reclaim control over its resources, its development, and its strategic future? A few things in my speech today: rebuttals, why we win over the OG, weighing on clashes, metrics, and best case, worst case scenario, and finally, exclusive impacts. Panel, firstly, this is an active motion, right? We are the Indian Indian government. That means our primary obligation is to maximize India's long-term security, stability, and development, not to equally balance the interests of Pakistan or abstract international norms. So, panel, we must evaluate this debate on which side best serves India's strategic interests over time, right? So moving on to some rebuttals. Firstly, closing opposition talks about how a model takes a decade to implement. But panel, this is not even a reason to reject the model, because even if infrastructure expansion takes time, right, policy shift happens immediately, legal constraint removal is instant, and planning investment can begin right away. And even if a charitable plan do accept delay, a delay in implementation is a feasibility issue, not a comparative downside, because opposition offers like no alternative infrastructure expansion, no adaptation to climate stress, only preservation of a rigid system. So even a slow improvement is better than like permanent structural constraint. Secondly, they talk about how like we destroy like leverage and pressure Pakistan. Panel, this is a misunderstanding of like structural relations. What they call leverage is actually artificial dependency created by treaty rigidity, not a stable or constructive pressure mechanism, right? Thirdly, they talk about like opening opposition talks about how like India gains no real water, only symbolic control. Panel, this is factually wrong. Termination doesn't move rivers, but it does remove like legal restrictions on storage. That is a real material control, not symbolism, right? Second, even if implementation is gradual or difficult, that's just a feasibility issue again, not a reason to maintain permanent constraints. Thirdly, they talk about like how it damages credibility in rule-based economic order. First, panel, rule-based order is not static, right? It evolves with climate change, population change, and economic realities. A 1960 framework is not secret order, it's like outdated structure. So India isn't breaking order, just normalizing and modernizing it, right? Second, even on their best case, they don't show like economic impact. India's growth is driven by domestic markets and infrastructure, not one bilateral treaty. So at most, such as diplomatic noise, not even economic damage, right? Panel, now like why do we win over opening government? Because OG tells us that the treaty is outdated because population has increased, water demand has risen, and Pakistan holds a disproportionate share of river control. While they give you a diagnosis, we respond by showing you what actually follows from that. We show you that instead of staying locked into this framework, India gains sovereignty, control over water infrastructure, economic and developmental expansion in agriculture and northern regions, and a shift from like fixed entitlement based sharing to adaptive climate responsive governance. So while OG like only identifies like this imbalance, we explain how to like actually structurally resolve this. And in our debate about policy, we clearly win in this, right? Moving on to the clashes. The first clash is that should we prioritize a rigid entitlement system or a flexible like sovereign water control? This decides whether India can adapt water use to climate stress, population growth, and infrastructure needs. Opposition supports like maintaining the treaty as a fixed legal entitlement system that guarantees water shares regardless of changing realities. We show you that this rigidity is the core problem because water demand is not static, it changes with climate and development. So a fixed allocation system cannot respond to these shifts, meaning it structurally underperforms in the modern world. So in their world, India remains locked into like outdated legal limits on water using and storage. It's unable to expand infrastructure or respond flexibility like droughts, floods, or rising demands. And in our world, India gains sovereignty, flexibility to build storage, manage seasonal flow, and allocate water based on like real-time national needs and climate conditions. And we win because in any future-facing system, adaptability is superior to static entitlement. Right? Moving on to the second clash on how like should water policy prioritize diplomatic stability or domestic development capacity. Right? This determines whether water is treated as a political constraint or an economic growth driver. Opposition argues that like maintaining the treaty preserves diplomatic stability and protects India's international credibility, which indirectly supports economic growth. We say that even if diplomatic stability has value, they overstate its importance compared to like direct material outcomes. India's growth depends on infrastructure, energy, and agriculture, all of which are directly constrained by limited water access under the treaty. Right? In their world, India underutilizes their power and it restrains infrastructure growth in water-stressed regions. And in our world, India unlocks like large-scale irrigation, regional development, and improves like security and long-term economic capacity. We win because symbolic diplomatic stability cannot outweigh structural economic expansion in any world, right? Moving on to the metrics, firstly on scale of impact, our impact affects like hundreds of millions of people through water security, agriculture, energy, and regional development because water is a foundational input to all economic activity. Secondly, on likelihood, because our impacts are like highly certain once policy changes because infrastructure expansion and water reallocation are direct state actions and their impacts depend on like speculative escalation or reputational harm, which is uncertain and mediated through like multiple actors. And thirdly, on time frame, because our impacts are long term and compounding, because water infrastructure and allocation decisions affect decades of development, and their impacts are like just short term diplomatic reactions which fade or stabilize over time. So moving on to the exclusive impacts in this debate. So we give to you sovereign control over water allocation infrastructure, strategic autonomy over critical resource, and long term infrastructure scalability. And for all these reasons, so proud to propose. Thank you.
We thank the speaker for that speech. To close off the debate, calling on opposition whip. You're here.
Can I just get 1 minute or so?
Yep, go ahead.
Yes. I'll be starting at the self count of 3, 2, 1. Mr. Speaker, government has spent this debate asking you to believe that discarding your most powerful weapon makes you stronger. My member of opposition proved why that is the most dangerous idea in this round. And I will prove why her argument is not just correct, it is the argument that decides this debate. And I will show you clash by clash exactly why the government has no answer for this. And notice even their own bench admits this confusion. The DPM tells you, quote, temporary suspension is weak leverage. Pakistan can simply wait it out. But that concedes our entire case, because if waiting is possible, it is only because distortion exists. The moment you terminate permanently, you remove the incentive to ever change. They don't fix this contradiction. Now, closing government has told you two things. Permanent tension is a deterrent signal, and India has exhausted diplomatic options. Both collapse on the same point, and MO identified it precisely. On deterrence, government's argument requires that removing the treaty creates more pressure than maintaining it. But think about what it requires you to believe. The Pahalgam attack happened while the treaty was fully active. Well, Pakistan received 80% of Indus Basin water flows every single day. That day, dependence, the structural weight did not deter the attack. So government must now explain why a single termination shock, which economies adapt to, which Pakistan has already begun planning infrastructure alternatives for, deters the next one more effectively rather than the ongoing threat did. They cannot explain it because their own logic runs in the opposite direction. The ongoing threat is the coercion. The permanent termination is the end of this coercion. Government has confused firing the weapon with the pointing the weapon. And their member of government doubles down on this flawed logic when they say uncertainty is the entire point. Pakistan now has something material at stake. No, uncertainty only works when it is conditional. When restoration is possible, if nothing you do can bring the treaty back, there is no reason to cooperate, only to escalate faster and secure alternatives later. That is not deterrence, that is a countdown. On exhausting diplomacy, the treaty survived in 1965, 1971. It survived Kargil. Each time, both sides chose to keep the framework alive because they understood something. Government has forgotten that some instruments are more valuable intact than expended. Terminating now does not prove diplomacy is exhausted. It proves India has stopped thinking beyond the immediate crisis. Now, clash number one. Does termination produce leverage or destroy it? Opening that termination gives power over Pakistan's more existential vulnerability. My MO proved that the opposite. That is the most important argument in this debate. The treaty is not the water, it is the treaty of withholding water, the loaded weapon, not the fired bullet. And here is the mechanism government never answered. The moment India terminates permanently, Pakistan gives full international legitimacy to pursue Chinese funded storage, World Bank backed infrastructure, alternative diversion projects that previously constrained. Because when the treaty governed allocations, India's an act that liberates from Pakistan's cooperative orbit permanently and irreversibly. Opening government never tells you how they prove leverage. They only assert ownership. Their prime minister literally tells you India is where the river starts. India should get the control. But control without enforceability is fiction. As LO proved, termination does not redirect a single drop. Our MO goes further. Even the threat disappears. So opening opposition shows you no gain. We show you a permanent loss. Government wins a one-time shock. Pakistan wins permanent freedom from the dependence that India gave its leverage. On this clash, who actually gains power? Opposition wins completely. Clash number two, who bears the cost? Opening government said it is Pakistan's leadership bears the cost. My MO proved it is $300 million, 100 million people, dollars earning 200 billion. Currency in India, civilians in Sindh, Punjab who bear it, farmers, not generals, people who have no control over the government's foreign policy decisions that Indian civilians do theirs. And their own bench concedes this when they say we are not advocating humanitarian harm. Changes are gradual. Exactly, gradual harm, prolonged suffering with zero guarantee of compliance. Government absorbs pressure, civilians absorb consequences. But here is what closing opposition as that opening opposition did not. The cost does not stop at Pakistan's border. When India terminates a World Bank brokered treaty under political pressure, China, sitting upstream on the Brahmaputra, receives the precedent that the powers may exist treaty obligations when politically convenient. India has just written the legal justification for its own future water crisis. The cost lands on both sides. Government never touched this. This remains completely unanswered. Clash number three. What does irreversibility mean for our future? This is where my MO's argument becomes generational, and this is why it is the most important argument. Every future crisis India faces, every terrorist attack, every cross-border provocation, every escalation cycle for the next 100 years now produces the same paralysis: military escalation with full nuclear escalation list, or complete silence that signals impunity. The coercive middle path is permanently closed, not because India was forced to close it, because India chose to. Notice how the government never answers this. Instead, they shift to feasibility. Infrastructure takes time, but planning starts immediately. That is not an answer to loss of leverage. That is an admission that the only benefit they can offer is delayed, while strategic cost is immediate and permanent. Government says justice demands punishment. My MO answered this precisely. Justice is achieved through self-destruction, is not strategy, it is reaction. The question is not whether India is angry, the question is whether the instrument serves India's security across the next 100 years. And the answer is only if India keeps it. Now, the last opening opposition proves termination misfires. It destroyed weapons and frees the target. Closing opposition proved why that matters beyond today, because India will face another Pahalgam, another Barakhamba, and another terrorist attack. And without this instrument, the only answers become a war and silence. Thank you.
We thank the speaker for that speech. That concludes the round. You may now virtually cross the house. As for all the judges, let's head to debate room 1. Thank you. I'll stop the recording now.